All right. Well, welcome to you, Russ, to the Dynamic Competition Initiative podcast. It's the third episode of the series. I am delighted to welcome you, and I know Nicolas is as well. And actually, I will start with a story because I know precisely the day when I was introduced to you and Econ Talk. This was on December 12, 2016. And the reason why I know which day this was is because that day I defended my PhD and Nicolas was in the jury of my PhD. So this lasted for 4 hours. And eventually Nicolas came to me after the defense to congratulate me, but also to say, hey, I think you will enjoy listening to Econ Talk very much, which I did on December 13, 2016. So at the time, Econ Talk, I'm pretty sure existed for more than 10 years because I do remember episode with Ronald Coase of 2006. So it was probably around that time, I suppose. And I spent a couple of months listening to all, and yes, I say all, Econ Talk episodes, which took me quite some time. And since then, I've been, a faithful listener of Econ Talk every week. You're part of the family here, very loud on the speakers. So I feel like I know you, and I know it's going to be a curious experience to have this conversation with you. Your voice is so familiar. So I very much look forward to the discussion. And so when you published your latest book, Wild Problems, which I have here, subtitle being a guide to the decisions that define us, we thought with Nicolas that this would be the best opportunity we could find, or the best excuse to actually bring you here in the podcast and have the conversation that we wanted to have with you for so many years. So welcome again, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation. We have a couple of questions that we will be asking in the context of the Dynamic Competition Initiative. Our objective is to provide academics and policymakers with better framework and tools to better understand innovation, better tackle or not uncertainty, which is one of the theme of the book. So in this context, I will actually start with the very first question. You make a distinction in the book between tame problems and wild problems. So my question is the following: is competition policy or policy to encourage innovation a tame or a wild problem? Or said differently, how do we distinguish between these two sorts of problems?
Well, first I want to say thank you for listening to Econ Talk all those times. I think we have about 880 hours of material in the archive now. We go back to 2006. I always warn interested listeners that in the early days of the program, I was a different kind of interviewer than I am now. I hope I've gotten a lot better, but who knows? But I worry that when people go back to the beginning, which they sometimes do, that they will be shocked and horrified. So with that warning, to those listening now, I thank you for the encouragement you've given to Econ Talk, and thanks for listening all these years. So my book is about how do we think about decision making when we have very limited data and very few analytical tools, if any, for making a decision. And most of the decisions I talk about in the book are big life problems: whether to get married, who to marry, whether to have children, how many children, whether to change careers, where to live. And we have some information about those problems, very little data. And more importantly, often the data we have are shockingly incomplete. So to take an obvious example, if you've never been married, married life is very hard to anticipate. If you've never had children, it's very hard to anticipate what it's going to do. And the parts that you do understand are actually not the most interesting parts, I would argue, and they're often the negatives to the decision. The positives are often veiled or hidden from us. And so using traditional decision-making tools or decision-making framework, I would argue often can lead us astray in those kind of settings. So that's what the book's about. And in the absence of analytical techniques or data. I talk about different ways one might think about making those decisions. Now, in terms of innovation or competition policy, it's certainly a wild problem in the sense that I don't think any one policy is very often difficult to anticipate the full range of consequences. If you're not careful, that kind of uncertainty is crippling. It can lead to procrastination and a desire to get more information until we can better figure out what's going on. And in an example like innovation policy or competition policy or marriage, marrying a particular person, I'll date her for a few more months and then I'll know. Well, life generally doesn't work like that, either in marriage or public policy. We know some pretty basic things about competition, though. We have, I think, some idea of when it's helpful and some ideas of when it's not. What we're not so good at is trying to figure out how to improve it. We have very simple tools for getting more of something, but we often forget to measure what we'll have less of. And that's what makes, I think, public policy generally more challenging than other areas of life. So that's my answer.
Nicola.
Okay, so Russ, it's great to have you on the show as you talk about Econ Talk as the show. Ours is not yet a show, but we hope it's going to become one in the future. So look, I'm going to riff a little bit on the question that Thibaut asked you, but maybe less from a policy perspective and more from a business strategy perspective. So as you said, your book is a book about decision theory, and it's about the big decisions, not the small decisions. And so as I was reading your book with my business interested eyes, I was asking myself, how do the findings and principles that you stress in the book travel in a business environment? So, my question would be, what kind of wild problems do managers in a business corporation face, and how should they go about them, right? If you have to give the, spill the beans to a manager's audience, how would you pitch that?
So no one's asked me that question, and I'm going to answer it in a sort of slightly egocentric way. And I'm a president of a college here in Israel, and I have to make decisions all the time. Sometimes by myself, but often almost always with the help of the rest of the members of my leadership team. And we almost never have any real data. When we decide, say, to launch a new major, we only had 2 until I got here. There was a plan to launch a 3rd. We had to decide whether to pull that trigger. And we did. And we don't know what's going to happen. Is it going to cannibalize the 2 existing majors? Is it going to expand our admissions pool or recruitment application pool? We don't have a lot of good data on it. And even a survey, which is a standard way that people try to get data on this, is of course flawed. People don't know that much about what the major is going to be like until it's existed for a while. So it's a typical kind of problem, I think, that a firm has to make. And often for a firm, it's ironic. As economists, we are trained, and we train our students, at least until fairly recently, to believe that the biggest decision a firm makes is how much to make of the product that it's producing. And that is really not the focus of most challenges facing a business. Their big decision is whether to make something and what to make, not how many. The how many is interesting. There are interesting issues around productivity and production, and how many factories to have, and what's the capital labor ratio, and what's how much you should invest in improvements and so on, oversight, management. There's a lot of important issues around quantity, but quality or what to produce in the first place is really the biggest question that a business faces. And often in the face of competition, they need to change. Particularly, say, a startup. Startup might have an idea, they test it, doesn't look like it's going to work. Do you tweak it, or do you take a radical pivot? There's no, there are no rules. You might have an experienced entrepreneur might be better at making that decision, having seen many other cases. It also might be worse. You know, they might have their ego wrapped up in the current conception of the product. It might be very difficult for them to cut that loose. So, so now, with that having been said, that there's some definitely wildness to serious, large strategic questions facing a business. What are some of the tools or frameworks that I talk about that might be helpful? So one of the examples I use is I call privileging your principles. And I suggest that if you violate your own ethical code in the name of being happier, in the name of short-run pleasure, in the name of just doing what's seductive, you will pay a serious price. And so one way to think about how to explore certain paths and push away others is to say, is this who I want to be? I mean, is this not so much what's my ethical code, how does it apply here, but rather, if I make this decision in this way, I'm going to become a different kind of person. And you know, one of the things that I think is very hard in the business world, and it's particularly hard in the nonprofit world, I'm at a college, is the question of mission creep. And it applies to both the profit and for-profit world. So a lot of times you'll be tempted to go into a certain area of expansion because expansion always feels good. And you forget that it may diminish your ability to focus on what we might call your core mission in the case of a nonprofit. Or in the case of a for-profit business, it may involve some ethical shortcuts, that new product line or that new venture that make you uncomfortable, but you feel like the business is at stake and I got to fix this. And I think remembering who you want to be is important both in personal decision-making and in business if you're an ethical person. One of the rules that I use here, which on the surface is totally useless, but it helps me a great deal, is that when I have a decision to make about whether to add something, subtract something, emphasize this, take away that, something falls in our lap that promises exposure to a wider audience, something we're very eager to do because we're young, we're only 10 years old here at Shalem College in Jerusalem, Israel. When those come along, I try to ask myself and ask my team, are we building the place we want to build? Now that's a tautology. In a way, it has no decision-making value whatsoever. But for me, it's extremely helpful because it says, if we have a vision, whether it's literal, which we do, but also just the one we have, you know, the city on the hill that we have in our minds of what we want our company to be, or our organization, or the goals that we're trying to achieve. The reason we exist, the reason we matter, the reason that the world would be a different place if we disappeared and something else came along instead, or our customers, in this case, our students, had to go to a different university. There are many fine colleges here in Israel. What are we offering that is distinctive and that is who we want to be? And we should never, ever jeopardize that or compromise on that, because otherwise you're going to define yourself in a way that you're not going to be happy with. And so I think that principle, you know, that subtitle of the book, A Guide to the Decisions That Define Us, often we're looking at short-term in our personal lives, short-term pain and pleasure. And part of the theme of the book is to knock the reader on the head and myself and say, hey, there's more to life than that. You know that. You care about who you are, how you see yourself, your identity, and your essence. Don't compromise that. And that can be a helpful guide, I think, to decision-making, both in the personal sector, in your own personal life, as well as in the business or the nonprofit sector when you're trying to decide whether to fund a new venture, take a risk, take a leap.
So on that note, would you say that to be who you want to be transposed to companies, an idea might be to put more emphasis on the kind of experience that you want to deliver to customers and less to obsess with your competitors, right? Because it seems to me it might be one way to distract yourself and to act in a way that your competitors are potentially initiating. So would you say that indeed an idea might be to be more self-centered in a sense?
Well, I think it's really, for me, it's more of a question of, we would not normally consider these big decisions, but rather small decisions. Decisions on whether to expand the workforce, contract the workforce, require a new type of background in certain types of jobs that are offered. And I think often in the business world, just like in personal life, you're seduced by the, say, bottom line. In the case of a business, in the case of personal, it's the short-term pleasure or pain you're either getting or avoiding when you make a decision. And I think for a business, there's a zillion temptations to do the wrong thing because of short-term gain. And I think principles, values in business are, underrated. I've always found it interesting that, and this of course plays to my free market predilections, but I always found it interesting that the most successful books in business are not how to take advantage of your customers and make a lot of money. Now that book you'd think would sell like crazy. I mean, who doesn't want to make a lot of money by taking advantage of, if there's a secret way to do it that people wouldn't really notice, you'd think that would be a common concept for a book. And yet, if you look at the best-selling business books of all time, there are books like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey, which is basically a religious tome or self-help book in the form of a business book. It's mainly about how to be a good person. And so part of what I'm saying is that, if your identity is to be a good person, which I encourage, and part of the theme of the book is to remind us to think about who we do want to be, not just some abstract idea or who we are right now. We might want to improve ourselves. I like to think that those decisions don't just matter in our personal lives, but matter in how we move through the world generally. And so for me, mission creep is about worrying about more than just, am I going to be as focused as I need to be? It also has to do with, why do I care about this? Why am I devoting myself to this business? Why am I devoting myself to making this product? And if it's not to make the world a better place, why would you devote yourself to it? You employ people, there are good reasons. Again, I go back to what I said before. If you dropped off the face of the earth that the product did, people would turn to your competitors, as you mentioned. It's better to have more competitors than fewer. That's generally the case, not always, but generally. And if you're not doing something in a distinctive way, why devotion's not the right response? Devote yourself to something else. Devote yourself to your family, your God, your values, your ethics, whatever they are, your ethos. But to devote yourself to a profit-making enterprise is glorious when it makes the world a better place. If it doesn't, I might want to think about doing something else.
It's a great statement. The statement you just made. I keep thinking about this expansion / bottom line / growing the business has what probably happened to a lot of players in the digital industries when they embraced online targeted advertisement as the main source of revenues and profits. And this might have been, the journey in which the companies, the corporations might not have been principled enough to understand that this would lead to a whole host of externalities, social costs of various types. And when we think about policy reform, if markets do not deliver the right incentives to align these business models with what society expects, there might be a space for policy to come in and say, look, we need to think a little bit about this, like, this constant targeting and placement of ads on whatever screen you have in front of you. So I think there's a very deep point about businesses sticking to principles and sometimes also rethinking about their initial principles to assess their future strategy. One question came up, Russ, when you were talking, and I'm going to shift a little bit here outside of what we were discussing. So you were talking about the economic models or the economic rules that we teach in universities, and they're all based on these ideas of, as you were saying, rational decision making. If you have enough data, there's no problem that you cannot really break down into an operational guidance. What makes it so hard to renovate the teaching of economics to include things like experience or routines or aspirations? Herbert Simon talked about this, like, goals are not easy to describe. There are more aspirations than performance function KPIs on which we need to make impact. So what makes it so hard to change a little bit the way we teach economics, and how far should we go into these other sources of wisdom?
Well, if it's okay, I just want to say one more thing about what you said right before your question, which is the tech revolution and the morality of that business and the values. Google used to have a motto. I don't hear much of it anymore. It used to have a motto: "Don't be evil." It's a pretty low standard. It's a pretty low bar, and yet, and they believed in that motto. I say that because in the early days of Econ Talk, I interviewed Paul Buckheit, who was the lead engineer, I think, but certainly the leader of the team that developed Gmail, which is a fabulous product. I love Gmail. I think it's spectacular. And at one point, we got talking about values and issues of moral challenges in tech, and he was very matter of fact about the fact that "don't be evil" was their watch phrase, and I thought, I'm not sure that's enough. And when I think about how attention in 2023 is devoted to this, the phone in my hand, and the social consequences of that, we could use some soul searching on it. There's growing evidence, and if you listen to Econ Talk, I'm very skeptical of evidence by itself in any one study. But what's a fact is that there has been a rise in mental problems for teenagers in the United States. And it's not just a definitional challenge of what's a mental issue, what's depression, what's anxiety. Hospital visits for self-harm and suicide have grown dramatically in the United States over the last 15 years. It starts around 2010, 2012, and grows steadily, paralleling the growth of iPhone and smartphone usage among teenagers and preteens, tragically, in terms of the consequences. Now, the correlation is not causation. There may be some other factor. It's really hard to imagine what that might be, because it's not a 10% or 20% increase. It's more like 100% in certain age groups. And so a doubling of tragedy. So we should have a conversation about that. Now, as you would expect, I'm much more eager to find a cultural response to that than a legislative response. But we ought to be having that conversation. Of course, we're starting to have it. It's happening in all kinds of ways, on the internet and in policy circles and in books and so on. Anyway, I just wanted to say that because I think it's very, very important. And I know incredibly talented people who've devoted huge parts of their professional career to getting people to click on stuff without any consideration of what, I don't mean the harm, just the clicking. Like, that's an interesting, strange thing to devote yourself to, but it's highly correlated with a lot of money for the employer. And I get why incentives push you in that direction, but it's something everyone should probably think about. Okay, now you had a question. What was the question? Remind me. I do want to answer it because that was a good question.
Yeah, the question was on our economics ways of teaching.
Oh, why is it? Yeah. So this is a deep and difficult question. Here's the simple answer, and if you remember my interview with Vernon Smith in around 2008 or 9, you'll remember this answer. He was a grad student at Harvard, and his teacher was Zvi Grilikus, who's a great economist. And at one point, Vernon asked what utility theory was good for. Utility theory is the way most economists conceptualize decision-making by consumers, and sometimes in wider contexts as well. And Vernon Smith, grad student who would go on to win the Nobel Prize, asked Zvi Grilikus, what was utility theory good for? And he said, exam questions. And I had a similar joke. I stopped teaching it to my students because while it is good for exam questions, I don't think helps you think very well about other things. And the simplest answer I can give you to why we don't teach economics the way we might, emphasizing decision experience, emphasizing intuition, emphasizing subtle lessons that come from experience, is that it's really hard to ask good exam questions in those contexts. So, for me, I'll give you an example. Okay, I'll give you a choice. You're teaching. You're professor of economics. You have a choice. You want your students to understand something about data. So should you teach them econometrics, which is the formal analysis and application of statistics to economic questions? Or should you teach them the intuition behind econometrics? Now, I once taught a course for master's students at George Mason called, I don't remember what it was actually called, but the real title was How to Think About Numbers. That's useful. It's really hard to ask exam questions about the intuition of how to think about numbers. I like to think my students got a lot out of that class, but it was hard to grade them. And that's no fun. And so all the incentives in academic life are to push you toward finding ways to distinguish among your students intellectually using exams, which is a horrifying thing when you think about it. Now, an exam does the second thing. It incentivizes the students to learn the material, but it incentivizes them to learn the material that you're going to test them on. And so if you test them on memorization, analytical proofs based on normal distributions that rarely exist in the real world, and so on, you have actually, I think, deceived them. You have failed to prepare them for the things that really matter. So I'm doing a book club with my students. We're working on an econ major here at Shalem College to design one, but we don't have one. So I'm giving a class, not for credit, to interested students on Nassim Taleb's book, Fooled by Randomness. Now, that's a remarkable book. I learned an enormous number of things from it. And I think the average reader would struggle to get as much out of it as I did, because I actually, in theory, knew all of it beforehand. And what this book made me do is realize how little I had absorbed of the things I knew. And so to teach that book requires some background, I think, for a analytically trained undergraduate or students. But it's fabulous. And at the end of that experience, I'm going to have a chance to reflect on if I had to grade the students in this class, which I don't. It's not for credit, just for fun. Just for the 12 students who said, I'd like to read that book. It'd be great. At the end, I'd like to see how much they got out of it, how hard it would be to test them on what they got out of it, and how worse the course would have been if I'd had the burden of testing them and distinguishing them among themselves as who was the better and who was the worse among them. So I think that's a huge part. Now, having said that, academics don't know much about real life. It's a fact, I think. I'm pretty confident of that. We're narrowly trained. Our ability to absorb lessons from life that aren't analytical and precise and good for exams is limited. And so if you're not careful, you could teach a course of platitudes. And platitudes are not unimportant, right? It's good to know that I'll say it. Here's one. It concentrates a man's mind wonderfully to know he's going to be hung in a fortnight. I think Samuel Johnson said that, basically saying that if you realize that life, if you would realize your own mortality, you would be a little more focused on what you do with your time. True. Now, having heard that, and it's worded in a way from 17th century, 18th century, that people go, oh, that's kind of clever. If I said, hey, life's short, use your time well, people go, yep, go on. How do you absorb that lesson in a way that actually changes how you behave? That's what education should do. Telling people the lesson doesn't do it. So is it experiential in the classroom, or is it the case that actually there's nothing you can do in the classroom with 23-year-olds to make them realize, or 18-year-olds, that life is short? They will realize it when they're 50 or 60, just like you did, and you will act accordingly when it's too late, more or less. So that's I think, the great challenge for these kind of insights that are, I would call, qualitative. So even though I'm somewhat critical of over quantification, over analyticization, whatever you want to call it, of economics and other things, you do have to teach people something, and mastery is often the goal. And there's limits to how much mastery you can bring in these kind of, either you can call them touchy-feely areas if you want to be dismissive, or you could call them intangible if you want to be a little more optimistic about how you think about it.
I have two quick notes before I give the floor back to Nicolas. But first, there is a great video on YouTube. It's a dialogue between Rolnikos and Stigler, in which they debate as to whether utility is something we should pursue, or whether or not agents are pursuing this kind of utility maximizing function.
Please share that with me. I'd love to see that.
Yes, and we'll put the link in the description to this podcast as well. The second one is that I just checked, and apparently "Don't be evil" is not the official motto anymore. Since Alphabet took over Google, they have a different one: "Do the right thing." Also a great movie, by the way. But yeah, when it comes to setting the standard pretty law, I think it's equally good. But Nicolas, back to you.
Yeah, it's very good tip. I want to kick the can on these questions of large social costs and benefits to decision making. So the book, which I really like, is a lot about how we as individuals face these wild problems and go about them. And I didn't find, if it's not a critique, it's more, just a point that kept me thinking. And I'm sure, you've gone through this in your own thinking.
Maybe.
There's, yeah. Okay. So let's see. Emergence is what we like here. So are there, contemporary, so you talk a lot about the vampire problem, right? So the question is, okay, if you had to decide whether you want to become a vampire, it's very hard because we don't have the data on, what it is to be a vampire and this and that. And And every vampire you would interview would tell you it's grand to be a vampire. It's just a fabulous life, and so it's a wild problem. Okay, so I was wondering what would be the analog of this individual decision-making problem in a social sense, in a collective sense, right? So, are we today in a place where our societies need to collectively decide, with all the costs involved in building coalitions and consensus in democracies? Do we face collective wild problems, and what could they be, and what institutions should address them?
So I just want to say something first about the vampire problem in a personal setting. The vampire problem, it's not mine, that insight. It's from L.A. Paul, the philosopher at Yale, and she uses it as a metaphor for decisions where there's little or no chance of turning back. Once you become a vampire, you can't stop being one. So it has a magnitude that's a little bit overwhelming. And her point is that, I would say a little bit differently than you did. In a way, you have a lot of data. I didn't really think about this. I easily called it a wild problem, but you have a lot of data because all the vampires you meet seem to think it's great. And her point is that it might be great for them, but it might not be great for you. That's the sense in which you don't have the data. You really want the data for yourself. Now, you could argue that, well, if every vampire likes it, obviously, even though it looks horrible to me now in the ex ante, ex post, it's going to be fine. Don't worry, jump, have children, get married, although you can get divorced, but it's costly and unpleasant, and so on. So the real challenge is how's this going to affect you, especially given that reversing it is very hard. That's and that's true of a handful of real life personal problems. Now, if I go to the societal issue, where again we can think about things that are going to change the nature of society in ways we can't fully anticipate, and we don't know whether we're going to like them until it's happened. That would be the other aspect of the vampire problem. And it's again analogous to having children or getting married. On the outside, it might look so good. And once you've done it, you have a different perspective because you have lots of data. You're a parent or you've gotten married. And so you know what it is like. Having said that, of course, all that changes over time in all kinds of unpredictable ways. But I think it's a fantastic way to think about so-called social questions. And I say so-called because we really don't make collective decisions. Things happen. We either let things go or we try to stop them, but the we isn't really real. It's the people who happen to have power, the people who are important, or it's a purely collective emergent decision that no one of us intends necessarily. And I think that's a very, again, I haven't really applied it as much. I do it a little bit in an essay. I don't know if you've seen it on Medium, called Apples and Oranges. It's a critique of utilitarianism. You might find it of interest. I do apply some of the lessons from the book to public policy, but not the one you're making. And this is a very important point. When the iPhone first came out, when smartphones first came out, I love them, and there are many things I still love about them. But I romanticize them, and I can still romanticize some of the world we live in with a smartphone. But I think it's pretty clear that it has come with some costs. It's pretty clear to those of us who are older. It's less clear to the younger generation who never experienced. They've been a vampire the whole time. They never know what it's like to live in the daylight and not sleep in a coffin and drink blood. But it came with costs. And, I think about Steve Jobs, who was a visionary, extraordinary visionary, and how happy or unhappy he would be with the world that he helped spawn. And I'm sure he'd have some misgivings. Still a debate whether on net, I like to think on net it's still a wonderful thing. And if you push me, I'll say, well, yeah, the downsides we haven't figured out the right cultural response, what I alluded to earlier. We'll figure it out. An example, I think the smartphone has degraded the quality of family life substantially. I keep the Jewish Sabbath, so at least for 25 hours, I don't touch my smartphone. My wife and I are more connected with each other without the phone as a distraction. In my fantasies, we'll figure out a way to do that in daily life as well. When the family has dinner, we'll all agree to put away our phones. It's really hard to do. I'm sure there are families that do it. We try to do it in our family. It's really hard to do because, I just want to look up this one thing. That's a great point. Yeah, what movie was that? I'll just look it up real quickly. And the whole tenor of conversation gets changed. And that's the phone. We're working on it. I don't know if we're going to be successful as a culture. But right now, for the last, 2 months, we're in the world of chat GPT. Is it a small thing or a big thing? I think it's a big thing. Is it going to become, you could imagine that it would be socially dishonest to send a close friend a condolence note on the death of a loved one that was written by ChatGPT without revealing that. I'm giving a talk on it in a few days, and for fun, it's not fun. It's kind of sad. I asked ChatGPT to write me a condolence note for a friend who'd lost a parent, and I wrote a really good note. It's as good as my first draft for sure, maybe as good as my third draft. And then I said, make it more emotional. And it did. It wrote an even better note because I thought it just didn't quite have enough to it. And then for fun, again, sort of not fun, I said, take it up a notch. And it did. And, that third draft was pretty good. And I would be tempted to send that to a friend. Now, you'd think we've developed an ethical code that's maybe not the right thing to do. I don't think we will. I think that because you can't show, a company, OpenAI, that's developing this in concert with Microsoft, could decide, it won't, pretty confident it won't. It could decide that anytime ChatGPT was used on a document, it would have a watermark of some kind. And then you could at least say, I used it for the first draft, but then I made it my own. And that might become culturally acceptable. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think we're just going to start using it. The last thing I'll say about that is, and then what's the consequence of that for human connection? The last thing I'll say is that the songwriter Nick Cave, somebody sent him a song from ChatGPT that was, quote, write me a song in the style of Nick Cave. And somebody sent it to Mr. Cave, and he wrote back a 2 or 3 page screed about why it was a horrible song and a despicable thing. And it's worth reading. And I agree with every word he wrote about the power of authenticity, the power of our humanity in crafting art. But I'm not sure Nick's going to win. And what's the consequence of that for who we are as human beings? No, I don't know. But you'd think we're having that conversation, I guess. But I'm pretty sure where it's going. It's really hard to stop it. It's very powerful, very hard to stop innovation. And part of me cheers and part of me cries. So it's complicated.
To these very specific points, and this idea that we may want to follow principles and be guided by some very strong moral ideas we may have, you make a point in the book, and this is something I thoroughly enjoyed actually, when you provide the readers with tools or framework to advance and maybe better think about those wide problems. You say that we should not try to rationalize everything, but to use rules instead. And you give an example of you taking the stairs, and I don't know if you want to go back to this one. I thought this was a very good one. In any case, this reminds me of Bob Oman, another Nobel laureate's concept of rule rationality. If you're not familiar, I'm sure, Russ, you are, but for everyone listening to us, this idea there is that it will be rational to follow rules when most of the time you will end up in a situation that is to your benefit, right? And so you won't have to question every single time you face the same situation whether or not you should behave in a certain way. And when I exchanged with Bob Oman back in the days, he told me that in his views, that's a way to bridge the gap between behavioral economics and sciences and the more Chicago approach to the field. So my question is, what do you think of that theory of rule rationality? Is it something that mirrors what you describe in the book, or do you see major differences that I've missed?
Well, and by the way, Mr. Oman lives, I think, about a mile from here where I'm sitting. I ran into him at a party about a year ago, and I had never met him, and I saw him sitting there, and someone introduced him. I was like, "Oh, I know who that is."
Recognize him. Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty sweet. You framed it as rules can be effective and efficient as a time saver. And I do think that's not unimportant, mainly because decision making is hard for human beings, in my experience, both personally and with people who now will send me emails asking for advice because I'm now an expert on decision making. And we know it's hard to do. And part of the book, outlines that, how hard it is even for so-called rational scientific people to make what would appear to be a rational decision. Doesn't come easy to them. So one argument for rules is that since you're going to struggle to make decisions rationally, and they're going to take a lot of time, if most of the time a rule of thumb will lead to a good outcome, just keep that as a principle. The example you mentioned is that, take the stairs rather than the elevator, because it's easy to rationalize why you won't do that. There is not there's a different reason, that's what I want to point out. It's not that I'm going to have a hard time figuring out if this is a good day for the stairs versus the elevator, but rather it's easy to fool yourself into thinking the elevator is justified. Oh, I'm a little tired, or I've got too many bags to carry, or whatever it is. So your default should be take the stairs. That's the claim. And there's a part of the book, I don't know, I don't think most people remarked on it, either in review or just casual response, because it's not a very pleasant thought, which is rationality is hard. So it's not for me that it's time consuming to make decisions. It's the Richard Feynman rule. The first principle is not to fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. We are prone to overrating our own powers of reason and not noticing or being aware of our own biases and shortcuts. And so rules insulate you somewhat from that kind of mistake. Most people don't like to admit that. They don't like to admit that they have these biases. So they always, I think most of us, I'm not talking about them, I'm talking about me too. Most of us think, well, I'm going to go on a case by case basis because there might be extenuating circumstances. And I think those extenuating circumstances are always there. And often they're just an excuse to do what you want to do all along and violate your principles. So that's why I think rules are important. And part of my goal in writing this book is to be a little bit of a contrarian, not a little bit, to be a contrarian on this view that I just need more data. Once you get more data, you'll make better and better decisions. And I think that's just not true in my experience of everyday life. Of course, it's true in theory. In theory, the more data you have, the better decision you make, of course. But that's not the world I live in. That's the theoretical world. In the real world, often more data is just cherry picked. It's what is at hand. It leaves out the things that aren't measurable. And when you point that out, well, of course, you keep that in mind. That's part of the analytical framework. But my experience is people have trouble keeping that in mind. So that's why you might want to think about going to what we normally call second best, which is what those rules of thumb are. Those rules that you're talking, rule rationality is, I think the way you phrase it, in most situations, it's going to turn out fine or better. Not everyone. Oh, well, then let's figure out on those, we'll ignore the rule. Then you don't have any rules. And eventually you're doing the thing that's comfortable or seductive, that's short run valuable, long run harmful.
You know, back to the distinction between theory and practice, I don't know if you ever came across this quote that is attributed to a French comedian, but in fact, I think it wasn't the one. But in any case, it says, one day I will go and live in theory, because in theory, everything goes well, right? Which I think is a good one. Attributed to Pierre Desproges.
Just allow me something, because Russ was hitting at something very deep when he was talking about ChatGPT, and Thibault and myself and Bo a week ago were in the Silicon Valley debating ChatGPT, and we had a very fierce discussion about this. And I think the discussion is a lot relevant to what I teach here at the UI, which is law and technology, to my students. And so I want to, maybe use this opportunity to get some more of your views on this. So, I often say that the challenge in the 21st century is probably to, get our spiritual or philosophical software right more than the economic software. We lived in a very secular world, and we are hit by very existential questions all the time. And I think my hunch is we're not very well equipped to address these gigantic and deep philosophical issues that keep hitting us on an almost daily basis. Now, one thing that we know from the 20th century and before is that nature can be disciplined by culture. But one other thing that we know is that we're not ready to take the leap against nature, because culture can save us. I mean, we're not ready to take any form of cultural artifact as the best response to the natural world. And to me, it seems that ChatGPT is straight there. So we've had a discussion in the AI community about symbolic versus connectivist AI. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but symbolic AI is a very sort of, let's build AI systems which have a philosophy, a representation of the world with, good and bad and ethics. Other AI specialists have said, we don't need this. We just need, large amounts of data, and we can study correlation. And if the results are good enough, it's good enough, right? Now, my submission is that in no state, in no functional society, we've adopted correlation as the dominant rule for decision-making in every and any, province of government affairs or individual life. If that was the case, cloning would be legal. Cloning animals or cloning humans is as good as a functional human, right? And your point about condolences was just about this. You can clone human-made condolences. Would you like this to be replicated at scale in society? So that the question then becomes, okay, what kind of use cases for this technology should be governed by limitations, on the understanding that cultural responses like spirituality might not be, enough today to domesticate the application of these systems into real world problems. So what kind of institutional response should we need, and how to define use cases?
Well, that's a tough one. I don't know the answer to. I have no answer. But I love your point about thinking of ChatGPT as a variation of cloning, right? That really superb condolence note could become so frequent that every time you search for it, it's what gets produced. And after a while, you send the condolence note. It's the one everyone sends. It's human-free, it's emotion-free, it looks good. It has the patina of emotion and authenticity and none of the reality of it, none of the depth. the other part of this that your question provokes, again, I'm not answering it. I don't have a good answer, but it fascinates me. Sam Altman, I follow Sam Altman on Twitter. Sam's the head of OpenAI. He said, I know ChatGPT has a lot of biases. We're trying to fix them. And I responded and said, maybe it would be really good to educate people into thinking that not everything that is on Wikipedia or the ChatGPT says is good. First of all, they're literally errors, obviously. It gives you all kinds of anomalies and factual anomalies, meaning lies, things that are not true. Not like, oh, I'm not sure that's true, but not true. Where somebody worked, where they went to school, whether they wrote this book. It makes all kinds of errors like that. We'll get better at that. I'm sure they'll get better at that. It'll get, it's so new. But human beings are biased. There's no such thing, you're this distinction you made between symbolic and what's the other kind?
It's called connectionist.
Right? It reminds me of the economists who say, well, let's just let the data speak. We don't need a theory. Well, if you're just going to let the data speak in how you generate condolence notes, songs, lyrics, essays, etc., art of various kinds, you do need a way to think about it. You need a framework. You need a theory. Now, you could argue, but I don't know what the right one is. Well, no kidding. Welcome to reality. But the other mistake to make is to say that because I don't have I'm not imposing anything on it, then it's just the data. It's just, what is the dominant phrases that have been used around race, religion, gender, you name it. And of course, sometimes they're not nice. And so a human being, as the consumer of this product, is going to have to learn to consume it thoughtfully rather than like truth. That would be a really powerful cultural response. I'm not sure that's really reasonable. But I do think it's extremely dangerous to assume that because I've taken out all the theoretical framework, which would be biased, that way I'm not imposing a theory on the data, that therefore it's clean or true or unbiased. And that's insane. And it's a very common response by, I don't mean to be unfair to engineers, but it's an engineering mentality. It's a technocrat mentality. It says, this problem just needs to be solved. It's a question of putting enough energy and human power into it and time, and we'll fix it. No, we're not. Can't fix that problem of bias. And you can't have the data speak more and more just for itself and not imposing cultural norms and 1,000 things around it. I'd rather have 5 ChatGPTs competing with each other. And we're going to have a couple soon, right? They're already out there. And you'd have to decide which one spoke to you, which one seemed more true, which one had more authenticity, which one didn't slander large groups of people through racism. You'd have to be a human being, but we don't want that. Just tell me, give me the one that works. Give me the best one. And that's our impulse. And it's also, by the way, a very lazy response, right? The idea that we might have to do some work in thinking about how we want to consume these things that this kind of technology produces. It's just not popular. Just fix it. So, I don't know if this is a good analogy, but we all want to live forever. At least, I'll say it better. Nobody wants to die today. Some people would say living forever might have some problems, but nobody wants to die today. So, I think I've told the story on Econ Talk, because I heard it from an emergency room doctor, and the family comes to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, this is a true story. He says, unfortunately, your father is not well, and I think it's time you need to get prepared for dealing with his death. And the family doesn't say, okay. They say, well, okay, so what do we do now? Is what they say. What do you mean, what do we do now? well, what's the next treatment? I mean, okay, it's bad, but we got to try some. I mean, there's a pill, right? There is something, a treatment, a device. No, there's not. And I think we spend a lot of time trying to extend life, and we ought to be thinking sometimes about how to die better instead of having to live longer. I want to live longer. I'm not saying we shouldn't try to extend life. We should, but our thirst for fixing things, solutions, very human urge, a wonderful human urge. It distracts us sometimes from the inevitable, and therefore we don't spend enough time on the inevitable because we don't like to face it. We'd rather push it off. Very human, very normal, admirable. Part of some of the greatest things we've ever discovered as a human species. But sometimes it's better to face the reality. And so instead of trying to say, our goal is to make ChatGPT as bias-free as possible, because it could always be better at that. Maybe it would be better to say, our goal is to remind and focus our consumers on the fact that sometimes what we produce isn't true or not nice either. They're both important. And therefore, you could respond to it in all kinds of ways. So when we come back to I think I'm sort of answering your question. When you think about ways that we can culturally respond to the imperfection and challenges of these kind of revolutionary technologies, we tend to think in ways of, well, either how do we stop them from existing, or how do we make sure they just get fixed so they don't have these problems? But most of them, they're always going to have problems. So maybe it's better to, instead of getting rid of all the problems, figure out how to live with them in the real world.
Well, that's a very deep thought, and I'm very sorry to have to go back to the law here. But I just wanted to mention that as we speak, February of 2023, we have a draft for a regulation for artificial intelligence in Europe. And that's precisely what you have right now in the draft, right? It says that every AI system should be trained on the basis of errors-free and unbiased database, which, first of all, does not exist. Every computer scientist will know that. Plus, indeed, as you mentioned, it might not be all that is required. I want to close with a final question. So if we, as a society or businesses or individuals, are facing wide problems, and if we can apply a framework to better approach those problems, but without ever being sure that indeed we're going to make the right choice, right? Which may mean that, well, once in a while someone will get married and it's not for the person, or we get child, but well, what can you do? That leads to some uncertainty, right? Which is inevitable in a sense. And you make a point in the book that uncertainty makes us, people, companies, societies, anxious. Now, as competition lawyers, and Nicolas and I are competition lawyers, we tend to think of uncertainty and being anxious as being something positive, right? So you would say it's good that a company is anxious regarding what's coming next, so that they keep on innovating and lowering prices and so on and so forth. Now, my question is whether or not you would make the same points outside of the business realm. So for people, would you say that it's good to some degree that we stay anxious as to how we approach uncertainty, or would you make a difference here between the business world and our so-called real world?
Well, that's a great question. Bill Gates said at some point, maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15, guessing, when asked something about, how as a leader, a manager, he managed to stay focused. That might not have been the question, but something like that. And he said, well, every week we always worry whether we're going to make payroll or not. Now, that's not really literally true. Most weeks they're going to make payroll no matter what. I love the story, you've probably heard me tell it, of, FedEx ran out of money in its early Federal Express in its early days, and Fred Smith, the CEO, went to Chicago to get another loan, and they said no more. And so he gets back on the plane to Memphis, and he's going to have to tell his employees, "I can't pay you," and it's over. He didn't want to accept that, and he looked up when he looked up at the departure board at Chicago on his way back to Memphis. He saw there was a flight leaving for, I think it was Reno, Nevada. And he got on that flight instead. And he took all his money, some of which evidently he may have taken. Apologize if I have these facts wrong, but he did use his family's trust fund that he shared with his sisters, and I think they were not happy about that. But he took whatever money he had access to at that point, and he went to the roulette wheel or the blackjack table, and he gambled until he made enough money to make payroll that week. And then he went back to Memphis, and he kept the business going for another week. So that, when you know you're going to be hung in a fortnight, concentrates wonderfully. He innovated in an extraordinary way. It turned out, well, it might not have. It could have lost a lot of money, and the company could have closed, and the world may have never had the idea of overnight shipping. So that, I think, was a good thing. It turned out great. And so anxiety in that sense, the desire to avoid a bankruptcy was anxiousness about that yielded a very good outcome that time. I pushed pretty hard in the book for not treating life that way. I spend some time trying to argue that we don't generally make mistakes when we face wild problems. We may have outcomes we wished were otherwise, but to me, a mistake means that given the information, you chose the wrong decision, made the wrong decision. Usually we don't know how that outcome is going to turn out, but almost by definition. And we don't have data, and we can't get data. It's not like we were lazy and then go look for the data. We don't have it. You've never been to Amsterdam, and turns out you hate bicycles, but well, in that case, you should do a little reading and you'd find out. But if you take a vacation and it isn't that fun, you don't call it a mistake. You usually just say, well, that didn't turn out as well as I thought. It's really hard to do that with a marriage. Most people will fight against that emotionally. They'll try to make it work for a while, but eventually, often couples that were not meant for each other will get a divorce. And that has a whole another set of challenges I talk about in the book. But the point is that we only go around once. We have one life to live. And if you spend your whole time worrying you're going to make the wrong decision, you're going to miss out on most of it. So my suggestion, which is not easy advice to take, it's easy advice to give, is to worry less about it. And I talk some about how you might get better at that. But in general, it should be the way we raise our kids, I think. The flip side is to treat ourselves more like businesses. That if we don't make our kids anxious and ourselves anxious, we'll be careless. We won't devote enough time to these kind of decisions. And part of the point of the book is that it's really not clear that time is going to help you make a better decision. And it's a little bit like the ChatGPT thing. Wouldn't it be better to spend time and energy thinking about how to cope with the outcome that you actually get, rather than spending more time trying to make a better decision? And we don't have much of that in our culture, right? We don't have much about rolling with the punches, and we have it. It's interesting. We have it in Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley, the stereotype is, if you fail, the more you fail, the more easy it is to raise money. It's a paradox. And so don't be afraid to fail. We tend not to treat our kids that way. We treat our kids to be more anxious about their academic, their success in school or their plan for their career. And I think most of the time that doesn't serve them well. It serves us well as their parents, because it allows us to brag to our friends about what our kids are doing. But that's a really bad way to think about how to raise your kids. So.
Thanks, Russ. That was again very good segment. I'm the father of two young girls. They're 3 and 6, and I've come to parenthood. I was a young parent when I was the first time in America for a long time, and I was astonished by the way a lot of my friends in America think about how to raise their kids. And it's all about performing in sports, and it's a very competitive society. So people have to engage in the competition, and when we were there with my wife, we were thinking, okay, is this really what we want to do? Like, put them on this track of, intense competition and anxiety. And then it sort of helped us also think about what we want to achieve. I mean, one thing that I often say is, I don't want my kid to be a doctor or a university professor. I don't really care about this. I just want them to be self-confident in the world that we face. And this is my only ambition for them. That's really whole. And your book, in a way, was very helpful in making these thoughts come across clear. I need to close here. I want to tell you a little story too. Thibaut started with an anecdote. And, Russ, I've told you in person, but I think I owe a lot of my adult life to a significant share of my adult life has been shaped by what you've produced on eConsult and in conversations we had in the past. Now, one very concrete way I can illustrate this is a few years ago, I was thinking about whether I should run a marathon. And at the time, I was speaking with colleagues from American universities, and a lot of them came to me with this very utilitarian response. They were saying, why would you do that? I mean, it's very bad for your joints. It's hard. You're going to spend a lot of time out of your, more important activities like work and family. So, there's no rational reason why you would go through the ordeal of running a marathon. Now, this is, before, in a way, I encountered Russ Roberts and eConsult. And, I picked up two things which allowed me to, I ran the marathon. I took the leap. The wild problem was addressed in a way in which I ran the marathon. And Russ Roberts helped me in two ways. One is I listened to a lot of eConsult during my runs. And this reduced considerably the pain that I was physically enduring during my outings. But the second thing is, when I read your book, I realized again that you gave me a very good reply in the future if I had to meet a utilitarian colleague that would discourage me from running a marathon. At page 65, you write, I quote, "Pain, especially when it's in service of an ideal, can be a source of meaning." And I was like, that's the perfect line, right? Pain is a source of meaning. And I don't know how effective this will be in my next discussions with skeptical colleagues imbued in hyper rationality, but to me, it drives the point home about what I'm trying to do here. So Russ, thanks a lot for all you've given us today and in the past, and that you will keep giving us in the future. Thibaut, do you want to add something to this?
Just thank you very much. That's the main message I wanted to convey.
Well, it's wonderful talking to you both. Great conversation. Great job interviewing, and it's really fun. Thanks, you guys. Thanks for the kind words too. It touches me, and it's very incredibly gratifying. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.